So, dear colleagues, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, Professor Andrea Roque and his team, for inviting me to participate in this very interesting workshop, and also Guardia di Finanza for sharing its great experience in combating fraud, and for an opportunity to be in this very impressive building. It's a great pleasure. Before I will present my topic, let me briefly introduce the International Anti-Corruption Academy, because probably not all of you are familiar with this international organization. It's a relatively young international organization. The IACA was established in 2010 by the joint initiative of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, Interpol, OLAF, and the Republic of Austria, our host country. IACA has quite interesting legal status. On the one hand, it's intergovernmental organization with 77 member states and 4 international organizations, members of the Academy. And on the other hand, it's a post-secondary educational institution. IACA has 4 master programs for anti-corruption compliance professionals from all over the world. Actually, we don't have traditional young students, 20 years old, but our students usually experienced professionals from anti-corruption compliance between, I would say, 30 to 55 years old, prosecutor, police officers, compliance professionals, judges, etc. Besides of 4 master programs, IACA also offers open and tailor-made trainings on a wide range of topics related to corruption and other types of crime, and also conduct research. Among our research priorities are typologies of corruption offenses, the nexus between corruption and other types of crime, including, of course, fraud and money laundering, also anti-corruption compliance in the business sector. And last year, we started 2 quite interesting projects on integrity and compliance in sports and in the humanitarian aid sector. We're also looking at typologies of corruption offenses in these areas, best practices of organizations in implementing and maintaining compliance programs, and also psychological factors. So the topic of my presentation today is the role of anti-corruption compliance in the business sector in preventing fraud and in protecting European funds. Why anti-corruption compliance? First of all, because of the nexus between fraud, corruption, and money laundering. As you perfectly know, it's quite difficult to commit fraud without corrupt relationships in authorities. As a rule, criminal groups that plan committing fraud use corruption to prepare this type of crime. They also learn from each other and use similar schemes of fraud, corruption offenses, and following money laundering. In some cases, they use the similar financial infrastructure, shadow financial infrastructure. I will come back to this point. Also, of course, corruption enables the successful functioning of the shadow financial infrastructure. When authorities identify financial institutions and designated non-financial businesses and professions that provide various legal services to criminal groups, of course, they use corruption to protect themselves from detection. And we also observe a general trend that corrupt officials and fraudsters more and more often plan in advance the predicate offenses and the following money laundering, basically develop very professional, sophisticated schemes to avoid detection and prosecution. I have mentioned shadow financial infrastructure. And I don't know if colleagues from Guardia di Finanza agree with me or not, but based on my personal experience, I would say that it's easier to investigate schemes designed just for particular customer. Would it be corruption? Would it be money laundering? And it's much more complicated to investigate schemes when they use already existing shadow financial infrastructure that provide services on a regular basis for various types of criminals. As we see on the screen, it's just a simple example. the company that would like to pay bribe, basically transfer money to the company under control of corrupt official, the last company, can use this shadow financial infrastructure. And of course, in real life, we will observe not 2 companies in between, but most probably 20 or 30 companies and several financial institutions involved. And as you see, the company can pay to the front company that also receives payments from different customers that are not connected to each other, that have different purposes like tax evasion, fraud, money laundering, etc. So basically, this is a mixture of payments on the bank account, then money goes to the next company, and so on and so on. So let's say we have 20, 30 companies in the scheme. And finally, one of the last companies in this chain can transfer funds to the company under control of corrupt official who has to receive bribe. And even the amount can be different because they charge commission for these services. So how we can identify the link between the initial payment and the last company under control of a corrupt official? It's quite difficult, and from practical perspective, I would say that the most effective way is to detect such financial institutions and to take action against these financial institutions, because we can go after these customers one after another, spend a lot of time, but of course they will register new companies, find out new front persons, etc., to avoid detection and prosecution. So why compliance in the business sector is so important? You see, this is the result of a study conducted by Nordic Ethics and Compliance Association. As you know, Nordic countries usually have very good positions in the TI Corruption Perception Index, Finland, Norway, Sweden. But even companies from these countries mention that anti-bribery and anti-corruption compliance is very important. Basically, as you see, 94% of these companies put anti-corruption compliance in the first place in the anti-corruption compliance management system in general. And also business ethics is quite important. So why anti-corruption compliance can be used to prevent fraud and protect European funds? Actually, we started briefly discussing this topic yesterday during this final part of the session. And first of all, anti-corruption compliance is important to promote ethics and values. Of course, employees cannot learn all the applicable laws and regulations, but if they have a proper training on ethics and values, they can act accordingly in different situations when they have to decide, for example, to accept bribe or not, to be engaged in embezzlement of funds or not, etc., etc. Then, of course, compliance check in the hiring process is very important. As I said at the beginning, it's very difficult or even impossible to commit fraud if persons who plan this offense don't know anyone in institutions, in companies, business partners, etc. And quite often they use persons who already have some kind of previous experience in committing offenses, and compliance check can prevent companies from hiring such persons. Then conflict of interest management is also an important part of anti-corruption compliance, of any anti-corruption compliance management system. And at this stage, companies can try to identify obvious or sometimes hidden conflicts of interests between employees and public servants in different institutions. And also third-party due diligence and risk management. It's also important to check all the companies that will participate in projects funded by the European Union. Not necessarily the direct counterpart who applies for funds will have some issues. Criminals also know how we operate, and they prepare very well. And also managers of these companies are usually ready for interviews, are ready to provide necessary documents. But when the project starts, later on we can realize that maybe in the third or fourth line of subcontractors, something goes wrong. So basically this proper management of third parties, of related risks, can help to detect at the early stages such complicated schemes of fraud and following money laundering. Also, identification of suspicious transactions. I believe my colleague will speak much more about this topic. I just would like to mention that even companies, when they take measures to mitigate risks, can also look at financial transactions of their counterparts. For example, which banks they use to carry out transactions, if they use, for example, intermediaries, if they use consultants, etc., to detect possible irregularities in the financial schemes. Not just when they check the company as such, corporate structure, shareholders, etc., but also when they start doing business with the company, they can analyze transactions and identify some irregularities. Also, companies have reporting channels and mechanisms for whistleblowers protection as a part of anti-corruption compliance. They can conduct internal investigation, collect initial data, and cooperate with law enforcement authorities, basically simplify life of police forces and prosecutors. And also, anti-corruption compliance is important to guarantee the effectiveness and efficiency of other types of compliance, such as anti-fraud, antitrust, etc., or anti-money laundering framework. Because companies or financial institutions can have brilliant policies, perfect IT tools, databases, but if they have corrupt employees inside, basically the system will not work. So therefore, anti-corruption compliance is also a useful tool to guarantee the effectiveness of other types of compliance. So anti-corruption compliance, of course, is the initiative of companies to implement the anti-corruption compliance management system, but at the same time, there are obvious benefits for governments to support the implementation of anti-corruption compliance. First of all, of course, prevention is, I would say, more effective and probably cheap than detection, because if the offense is committed, of course, the law enforcement authorities will detect, investigate, prosecute, and ideally freeze money, freeze assets, and confiscate. But it takes time, and all this time, the society will not have the project implemented. If, for example, it's construction of school or kindergarten, it means we don't have school or kindergarten because there is no money for this. Then also compliance officers are contact points for supervisory and law enforcement authorities. They can provide support during the investigation. And it's also important in international investigations, for example. We all know that mutual legal assistance takes a lot of time. It's very complicated. But for example, companies can conduct interviews with employees in foreign branches or interviews with employees and their business partners abroad and provide these documents to investigative authority to simplify life and to save time. That is the reason why many countries, such as the US or UK, for example, France, also give points to companies not only for cooperation with authorities in the frame of investigation, but also for having effective anti-corruption compliance programs. So regulation of anti-corruption compliance, it's quite interesting because when companies started the implementation of anti-corruption compliance, I would say probably 20 years ago, many experts, including myself, expected that regulators will also develop very detailed regulations, requirements, similar to anti-money laundering compliance. But the reality is different. As we know, in AML-CFT field, AML-CFT compliance is based on international law and international standards, such as the FATF recommendations. It's very detailed international legal framework, and also national laws and regulations are based on international treaties and on the FATF recommendations. And basically, financial institutions know very well what are the expectations of regulators, what has to be done to comply with all the requirements. In the field of anti-corruption compliance, some countries have guidance for the business sector, but most of the countries don't have such guidance or standards. And it's quite challenging for companies, especially for SMEs, to design and implement anti-corruption compliance management systems. There are more than 40 international standards and guidance published by various international institutions. There is no any hierarchical system. guidance published, for example, by the UNODC, by the World Bank, OECD, the International Chamber of Commerce, etc., etc. So, and basically companies have to decide which standards or guidance are more relevant for them, which, as I said, for SMEs, it's very challenging. They usually have, ideally, one compliance officer responsible for everything. Also, companies consider some anti-corruption laws that have extraterritorial reach, such as the US FCPA, UK Bribery Act, the French Sapin-II, etc. And also SMEs take into account compliance programs of multinational enterprises, their business partners. The International Anti-Corruption Academy conducted comparative analysis of more than 40 anti-corruption compliance standards and guidance, and developed an overview as kind of practical tool that can be helpful for companies, especially for SMEs, when they design and implement anti-corruption compliance programs. It's free of charge. It's available at the IACA webpage. So what's going on in anti-corruption compliance, especially in the situation of COVID-19 pandemic and the following economic crisis? Governments need additional resources to cover additional costs from the budget, such as support of particular sectors, industries, particular categories of citizens in the crisis situation. So basically, they have initially unexpected extra costs that should be covered. And basically, there are two ways. The first one, to collect more taxes, which is problematic in the situation of financial crisis. And the second, to take more effective actions to prevent fraud, to prevent embezzlement of public funds, and to guarantee the proper use of funds for common interests. So in this regard, there are various initiatives. For example, the new US anti-corruption strategy adopted in December 2021 paid a lot of attention to the promotion of partnership with the business sector and to preventing and combating money laundering. It's interesting initiative in the Republic of Kazakhstan, country in the South Asia. The Republic of Kazakhstan adopted amendments to the anti-corruption law and established mandatory anti-corruption compliance in all state-owned enterprises. Moreover, the compliance function should report directly to the board of directors, not to CEO, not to top managers, but to the board, which has also, of course, representatives of government authorities. And in case of corruption, in case of embezzlement of funds, the chief compliance officer can immediately inform the board, and the board can immediately inform relevant government authorities, law enforcement authorities, first of all, to prevent this crime. So there are also ongoing discussions regarding mandatory anti-corruption compliance in some other countries, for example, in Brazil and South Africa. Some states in Brazil also at states level already adopted laws on mandatory anti-corruption compliance to protect public funds. And also it's interesting experience in France, because usually, as I said, anti-corruption compliance is a business of company and responsibility of the company. It's uncomparable to AML-CFT regulation, where central banks or other authorities have supervisory functions, take care about AML-CFT compliance systems. But it's quite interesting approach in France, because the French anti-corruption authority received, in addition to, I would say, traditional functions like combating corruption, also consultancy and
this one.
hope it's not a cyber attack.
No, I think it's just. I think it's just not properly charged. Oh,
Okay, it works now.
that's fine.
Okay,
Shall we
I should use this. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So I said that the French anti-corruption authority have, in addition to traditional functions, also advisory and supervisory functions. It established a special unit for this, which can provide companies with advice how to properly implement anti-corruption compliance in line with Sapin-II and guidance published by the French Anti-Corruption Authority. but also have supervisory functions and can check how companies that are legally obliged according to French anti-corruption law to have anti-corruption compliance in place, implement this, how they comply with legal obligations. So there are several modern trends in anti-corruption compliance that I would like to mention. First of all is growing role of ethics and values. And the reason why, first of all, multinational companies should take into account various laws and regulations of various jurisdictions, and for employees it's practically impossible. But it's much more easier to understand corporate principles, values, and to act in challenging situations according to these values and principles. Then, of course, digitalization of compliance functions. Companies implement also artificial intelligence, at least some of them, for example, financial institutions. Some countries even mention this in laws on anti-corruption and anti-money laundering, that companies and financial institutions may use artificial intelligence in the compliance management system. They use big data analytics to check their counterparts. And as I said, they try to use the artificial intelligence. At the same time, they have various obstacles to design, maintain, and evaluate anti-corruption compliance programs. First of all, it's crucial to localize compliance programs, taking into account national laws, regulations, also culture, values in different countries, etc. And it was an interesting study that came to the conclusion that more than 50% of multinational enterprises basically translate their compliance programs in various languages and expect that employees or business partners in other countries will fully comply with these compliance programs, which is not effective, I would say. If companies would like to promote their compliance programs, their codes of conduct, they should consider the realities and should find a way how to explain local employees, local business partners, their principles, values, compliance standards, etc. Then, as I have already mentioned, lack of guidance in some jurisdictions. Another issue is a lack of data. Of course, there are various service providers that also offer compliance tools, offer access to databases. For example, databases on politically exposed persons or on databases on registers of companies or shareholders, but there are particular limitations, and I would say that no one of global service providers can guarantee that this is complete information that is required for compliance check. Then another issue that exists even in the European Union, a lack of a standardized approach and limited access to information on ultimate beneficial owners in some jurisdictions. Of course, most of the EU member states implemented the European directive on anti-money laundering and established national registers of ultimate beneficial owners, but still not all the countries. And also outside of the EU, there are still various approaches to this issue, especially as far as these registers of beneficial owners of legal arrangements concerns, like trusts or other legal arrangements. Most of the countries implemented registers of beneficial owners of companies, but not legal arrangements. So then also countries have different lists of politically exposed persons, and a kind of good practice to consider as many lists as possible. Once again, it's more or less harmonized, standardized in the European Union, but in other jurisdictions, countries have different approaches. And I would say it also makes sense from the practical perspective for companies to harmonize at least provisions of compliance programs, anti-money laundering compliance program and anti-corruption. Because in AML-CFT, we usually consider as PEPs high-level officials, starting from position of vice minister or members of parliaments. But in anti-corruption compliance, it's important to pay attention also to lower-level officials, such as heads of units, departments, etc., who can provide corruption support also in various schemes of fraud and money laundering. And also another issue is analysis of transactions with crypto assets. There are also a lot of efforts to harmonize these laws and regulations and practices from the FATF. There are relevant provisions in European directives, but still there are some countries where a person can arrive with a smartphone and exchange crypto assets to national currency and then transfer the bank accounts of various counterparts without any control. So I would like to stop here and thank you very much for your attention. In case you have any questions or comments, I'll be happy to answer.